Jazz Notes Podcast. I'm Ben Anderson.
I'm Chandler Holt.
It is the first February Jazz Notes Podcast of 2025. Recording this on February 3rd after a crazy weekend in the NBA with the Luca Doncic trade. The Jazz made another trade. Jazz were also involved in the Luca trade, so of course we are going to talk about that. We'll talk about the week that was for the Jazz, the week that's coming up, and of course the trade deadline coming up and games, etc. We will close the podcast as we always do with your mailbag. Believe it or not, a lot of questions today. Yeah. Everyone likes talking trades, especially when the Jazz have been involved. So we will address those. You can find me on Twitter or Blue Sky at Ben's Hoops. Same with Chandler at C Holt Sports. I send out a prompt every Monday or whatever day we record, usually Monday, asking for your mailbag questions, and you can respond there. So appreciate everyone who has done that. Very, very interesting weekend.
Yes, definitely. Only two pieces of news for the Jazz from the last week are the two trades that were made. Let's start with the less interesting of the two. However, still important. The Jazz sent Drew Eubanks and Patty Mills to the Clippers for P.J. Tucker, Mo Bamba, a second-round pick, and cash. Mo Bamba was already waived because of the trade, the following trade, which was the Jazz, I believe they gave just $55,000 to both.
According to Andy Larson. Yep.
Yeah, to Los Angeles and Dallas. Got back Jaylen Hood-Schifino and 2 second-round picks from the Clippers and Dallas. When this trade went down, happened at about, I want to say, 10:20 Mountain Time on Saturday night, I sent the Shams link into our chat, and I tagged you. And your response, pretty simply, like most other people's responses, has to be fake.
Has to be fake.
And then I asked, did Shams get hacked? And then I sent his follow-up tweet a couple minutes later saying, yes, this is real, with the details of it. And then you said, I still don't believe it. I'm not going to believe it until I see Shams' face saying it.
Yeah. Honestly, I needed to see him say it. And then once I saw ESPN had run with it, I believed, because he works for ESPN now, that he had texted his bosses and said, like, hey, this is real. These are the people I've talked to. Even Shams has said that he thought that the phone texting him had been hacked.
Yes.
He thought somebody had taken, whether it was Pelinka or whether it was Nico Harrison from the Mavericks, like whoever told him about the deal, which is how those things work, he thought they had been hacked.
Yeah.
So he didn't believe it either. So pretty interesting. Yeah, it's just not something you see very often. Quickly, before we get too heavy into the Luka stuff, and maybe we should even wait we should talk about like the recap of the week and games for the Jazz, not that they were that critical. But let's not skip over Eubanks and Mills.
Yes.
Jazz get a second-round pick. As you mentioned, they waived Mo Bamba. He was never going to be a part of the team. And they held on to P.J. Tucker, which I think surprised a lot of people. I laid it out on Twitter, but if you're not on social media, I don't blame you. I will explain why that happened. Mo Bamba makes $2 million a year. So under NBA salaries, when you have cap space, even if you're just taking guys in your cap space, if you're making a trade, you can take back 200% of their salary plus $250,000. So about the most the Jazz could have taken back for is double Mo Bamba's. He's a little over $2 million. So double it. So $4 million plus $250,000. He's at about 2.3 or 4.3, 4.4 million is what you could have taken back. P.J. Tucker makes $11.5 million.
Yeah.
Now, that would allow the Jazz to take back up to double that salary, 11.5, I think is what he makes. So that would be $23 million plus $250,000. Now, the Jazz actually don't have enough salary cap space to do that.
Yeah.
So they can fill the cap space above his deal, but they can't do the full double plus $250,000. They can take back over $19 million, though, in his salary in the next 3 days. That's why they did it. That's why they held on to P.J. Tucker, because if there is a team that wants to shed $7 million and is willing to take back P.J. Tucker's salary, whether he plays for them or not, the Jazz can make that trade. And maybe there's a team that says, hey, we want a veteran who can be tough in the front court for 5 minutes 10 times before the end of the season. Yeah. And P.J. Tucker can do that. So that's the reason the Jazz did that. It actually is a smart financial move, and you may just end up buying him out anyways, but at least you maintained that asset. And I think teams have probably made mistakes in the past, like blowing financial assets that could be usable. And then you get a second-round pick in 2030 from the Clippers, which the Jazz had kind of already acquired. They had swap rights with that pick. Now they just own it outright. Okay. So they own their own pick in 2030 and their own pick, and the Clippers pick in 2030. They also now own the 2025 pick because that's the one they got from the Lakers. So just kind of an interesting little piece. You know, I'm sure we talked about it. I have to go back and listen when free agency opened. I'm sure we said very specifically, the Jazz signed Drew Eubanks in hopes that you can trade him at the deadline.
Oh, absolutely.
In hopes that you can get another asset for him.
Yep.
And the asset is probably a second-round pick. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if verbatim we had said that. This was the whole design with Drew Eubanks. I was surprised they traded Patty Mills because I think he was happy to come in and be an assistant coach in Utah. And, he'll probably get waived by L.A. I'm not totally sure what the plan is there, but he may have played his last NBA game.
Yeah.
But yeah, you got a second-round pick basically for nothing in Drew Eubanks. So that was a smart move by the Jazz front office, just maintaining little extra bits of flexibility. It's not a franchise changer, but it just gives you a couple more pieces to work with.
Let's get into the next week recap because we will definitely talk about the Luka trade and more stuff in the mailbag. Yeah. So a 4-game slate in the last week for the Jazz, and they went 1-3, so they did pick up a win, finally snapping their season-long losing streak, but started with a 125-110 loss to the Milwaukee Bucks, and then 114-103 loss to Golden State. The 8th loss in a row was to Minnesota, 138-113, and then finally they beat the Orlando Magic 113-99 on an awful shooting night from Orlando.
So the wheels had started to really fall off for the Jazz.
Yep.
You know, the Jazz had been in all these close games and playing into the fourth quarter, and it was an 8-point game or a 6-point game, and possessions mattered, and Isaiah Collier would inevitably have a few turnovers, and the game was over. They were down like 20 in every game here, like going into the fourth quarter. The Jazz had been absolutely steamrolled, and then they caught a very vulnerable Orlando team who is missing players, is just getting some of their healthy players back. Paolo Banchero had the worst night I've ever seen him play. He was 1 of 15 at one point, like as bad as you can be for a 6'10" guy who's super talented. They're really flawed. Orlando's super flawed. They desperately need a backcourt scorer, and you know they were missing backcourt pieces. But man, they looked awful. They don't make trades. They're kind of one of these weird teams that doesn't make trades historically. Their front office either doesn't believe in it or the owner won't sign off on it. Whatever it is, they need to make a trade this week to get better because Paolo's really good and Franz is really good and you've got some fun pieces. Suggs is good. And, you know, we didn't play in this game. Jonathan Isaac's really good, but like you gotta score.
Yeah.
Never forget this. The one goal in the NBA is scoring. That's why it's called a field goal. It's like the goal of basketball is to score. You can try and stop the other team as much as you want. Fine. You have to also put the ball in the hoop.
Yeah.
And Orlando can't do it. They are atrocious offensively. So they need to add some offensive pieces.
Speaking of the wheels falling off for the Jazz, you don't see Utah as a good shooting team. In fact, a lot of the players on the team struggle with their efficiency. In the first 2 games of the week, Milwaukee and Golden State, they got outscored by over 20 points in both games individually, points in the paint.
Yeah.
So it has definitely been a rough week. But doesn't matter if you pick up a win.
Yeah. So the Jazz, we can get to the standings update coming up here in just a minute. We'll talk about the week ahead. Jazz host Indiana tonight. Golden State on Wednesday. Could be really interesting because apparently Golden State is very heavily hunting for players to add to Steph Curry. They should have just traded for Lauri Markkanen on second thought. You know what? That 7-foot-tall, 40% three-point shooter, I know he's not shooting that this year, but like who you could have had for relatively small costs now when you look at how poorly Brandon Podziemski's played and Jonathan Kuminga is not even in the lineup right now and these draft picks don't matter for them. They should have done that. They should have pulled the trigger on that. That was really, really stupid of them. So Golden State Wednesday. Phoenix Friday also could be totally different because apparently Kevin Durant is on the market. That's kind of the latest rumor that's just come out, which I understand and believe and could have told you when they made all these horrible trades in Phoenix in the last couple of years that this is inevitably where they would get to. And then the Clippers, the Drew Eubanks revenge game coming up on Saturday. So we'll see.
All right. Should we talk about the standings?
Yeah, let's do a quick standings update.
First, what do you think for the Jazz in this 4-game week?
Going winless.
Winless, 0-4?
Yeah. 1-4.
Okay. Start another losing streak.
Orlando, I should have done, this is just poor preparation on my part. Orlando is really struggling.
Yes.
I think I went winless last week too. Orlando, I didn't realize was like truly atrocious, and then I certainly didn't know they were going to have Suggs out. So that was a winnable game for the Jazz. Indiana's good. Indiana's like truly one of the hotter teams in the NBA. Golden State is the type of team that just knows how to beat the Jazz because they can play 48 minutes. Phoenix should be hungry. We'll see. And the Jazz honestly should probably be worse because that's after the trade deadline.
Yes.
I think the Jazz are going to be worse as of Friday. And then same thing goes with the Clippers' second out of a back-to-back.
Okay, now let's get into the standings. With the 1-3 week, the Jazz are now 11-36, still 15th in the West, still 29th overall. And the Wizards won a game.
They did. They beat Minnesota.
Which is like the best case scenario for the Jazz.
Right.
But the Jazz also won a game, so still 4.5 games back from the Wizards. And with other wins, I want to say, from Toronto and some other teams, we're really down to a 4-team race now.
Yeah, I've had some Jazz fans, because I do my little thing on Twitter where every time another team wins, I put it on Twitter, that are in this conversation. And I've had people reach out and be like, why don't you do it for Portland? It's like, Portland has 20 wins. Like, Portland could not win a game the rest of the year, and the Jazz are not going to catch them. I don't think the Jazz are going to get to 20 wins. Toronto is really quickly getting there. Toronto's up to 16, so they're only 5 wins ahead of the Jazz, right there with Brooklyn. But Toronto's 8-2 in their last 10 games. Like, they're clearly not tanking above everything. They've doubled their win total in the last 2 weeks. It's crazy. So good for Toronto. They caught fire. We'll see who else does it. It's the Jazz. I'm even going to take Washington out of this.
Yeah,
Washington's not going to win enough games.
It's racing for second and third, basically.
Unless Washington goes absolutely crazy in their games against New Orleans and Charlotte and wins all of them and beats the Jazz twice, which I just don't think is going to happen, I'm taking Washington out of the conversation. So we are talking about, teams 2, 3, and 4. Those are the seeds that are up for grabs, which honestly, if you're a Jazz fan, that's great. Because what do we know? Those top 4 seeds, you basically have an identical percentages of getting the number 1 pick, the number 2 pick, the number 3 pick, and the number 4 pick.
Yep.
There's like no difference at all, basically. So that's where you want to be. And the Jazz have basically guaranteed themselves to be in that spot. You would rather be second. If you're going to be that bad, you might as well be second because then you can only fall as far as 6. So that's where the standings are. As we mentioned, Charlotte has 12 wins. Pelicans have 12 wins. Jazz have 11.
Yep.
Again, these teams do have to play each other. So someone is going to have to win some of these games, specifically Charlotte. Charlotte has to play Washington. Those are going to be opportunities for victories. They have to play Brooklyn. Brooklyn's not trying to win. I think Brooklyn probably is too far ahead of the Jazz.
Yeah,
in all honesty, at 5 wins with 35 games left, it's like, if they pick up 2, they're really going to be too far away. So, and they're not going to lose 35 straight.
Yeah,
I would bet. So, that not a big win not a big deal to lose to Orlando. And again, I think the Jazz are going to have a worse roster by the end of the week than they do right now.
Yeah. We can talk about some of the upcoming games for those tanking teams really quick. Like you mentioned, Washington and Charlotte playing each other coming up. And then Washington has in Brooklyn, home against Cleveland and Atlanta. The Pelicans are in Denver twice and then go to Sacramento. And then the Hornets, like we said, host Washington, host Milwaukee, host the Spurs, and then in Detroit.
So maybe... one of those teams has to win. Charlotte and Washington has to win, so there's a victory there. Maybe the Pelicans. I don't know. Maybe the Pelicans don't get swept at Denver, but probably do.
Probably do.
So, and I don't think the Jazz are going to win a game, so I think we're still going to be talking about a team that is 1 game back of the Pelicans and maybe the Hornets. Probably not. I think they beat Washington by this time next week. All right, let's take a break. Let's come back. Let's dive in a little bit about Jaylen Hood-Schifino and talk a little bit about that, and then we will get to the mailbag questions because I think there's some meat on that bone.
Yeah.
More Jazz Notes coming up next. Welcome back to the Jazz Notes podcast. Ben Anderson, Chandler Holt. All right, not a lot of questions in the mailbag about Jaylen Hood-Schifino, which I'm really surprised about. This is an interesting player.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if because on the court he's done anything interesting. He hasn't. He's been awful. But I think there's some backstory here that I need to dig around, but I'll just recklessly speculate and get myself in trouble. But I will be a little reckless with this because I actually feel kind of comfortable that it's true.
Mm-hmm.
So Jaylen Hood-Schifino was the 17th pick last year. That, first of all, that's crazy. 17th pick last year. Now, the Lakers had already given up on him because they didn't even pick up his option for next season to keep him under the rookie contract. Just like team control. They gave up on it. They said, not worth it. So they didn't like whatever it was that they saw and were willing to give up that on that asset. The Jazz were mentioned very closely with Jaylen Hood-Schifino leading up to the draft 2 years ago. Is a name that we talked about. I remember watching his film. Like, I very distinctly remember the Purdue game. Like, I watched a lot of Jaylen Hood-Schifino. And he's a big point guard. He's a really good pick and roll player. Now, he had Trace Jackson Davis, who is the surprise, I'll put in air quotes, center for the Warriors that hit. It was like, well, Trace Jackson Davis was like the best player in college at Indiana. He was like 20 and 10. He shot 40% from 3. It's like, yeah, he's a good player. Like, I get why he's playing well for the Warriors. Sometimes when you have that, a good big man, their guard looks good, and then they get to the NBA and they're terrible.
Yes.
And there have been a few examples of that historically in college basketball where, he looks like this pick and roll dynamo. It's like, no, he's playing with an adult man in college who can jump over everybody and dunk, and that is what Trace Jackson Davis does. So there's maybe a chance that Jaylen Hood-Schifino can't play at all. I will say this, though. People I talked to thought there's something with the Jazz and Jaylen Hood-Schifino leading up to the draft, and it just didn't happen. They didn't pick him. I don't know where he was on their board, but there was interest. I suspect they didn't back off that interest after 18 months because that's when the draft was. And then I would really bet you that the Lakers and Jazz had talked about a Jaylen Hood-Schifino trade before Saturday.
Okay.
Even if the actual call of, do you just want him for free because we got to get rid of him in this trade? Even before that, I would bet you the Lakers had called and offered Jaylen Hood-Schifino and like a pick for Walker Kessler because the salaries match basically perfectly. And the Jazz could have done that deal. So I bet you Jaylen's name had already been talked about. I bet you would have been talked about within the Jazz front office. I bet you they still were fresh on what had happened last year. They had done their due diligence on like, who is he as a player? What's he done with the South Bay Lakers? What do we know about the intel? Like, we've got our, sources around the league that like, is he a good guy? Is he a hard worker? Is he a bad guy? Is he going to get in trouble? I bet they'd kind of done a lot of that work already on him. So when the Lakers called, they were like, yeah. And it's actually probably why the Lakers called the Jazz.
Yeah.
The Lakers probably called the Jazz because they said, we know they like him. They don't like him more than they like Walker Kessler. They wouldn't trade Walker Kessler for him. But we know they're like clearly a little interested in him. So we don't need to call anybody else. Well, Jazz probably won't even ask like what the rest of the deal is, because otherwise they're going to bug us about getting Luka. But let's just send Jaylen there, and they'll take him. I have a strong suspicion, and I promise you it's not sourced, all suspicion, all speculation, that that's almost exactly what happened.
Okay.
His name has been around the Jazz a little too much recently for me to not think that like there had already been talks about him.
Yeah.
So when they needed to offload him, they knew where to go.
And it's going into his struggles early in his career. In 25 games, 1.7 points, 0.4 assists, 5 minutes a game.
Yeah.
One, it's hard for a rookie to come into a situation in the NBA where their team is trying to compete for a title, let alone the Los Angeles Lakers.
Especially the Los Angeles Lakers.
But if you look at his G League stats, 22 points, 5.3 assists, 4.7 rebounds, 47% from the floor, 43%
Shot the
from
heck
three.
out of the ball.
Yeah. In the G League, so it's like, I agree. I think there is something there, and I do not doubt your suspicion at all. I could definitely see something like that happen, and of course we will get into this more when we answer some questions about the Luka trade, but from what it sounds like, the Mavericks did not do their due diligence in shopping Luca Doncic.
No, they didn't. Yeah, they talked to one team.
Yes.
So yeah, there was that never opened up. So yeah, I'm looking at Jaylen Hood-Schifino, or JHS, is I'm sure how he will be known. Maybe it's only for a couple of weeks. Maybe he never really plays. I'm trying to look at how many games he's played more than 10 minutes. He did it 3 times last year for the Lakers and had one good game. He was 10 points and 3 of 4 shooting. I'm trying to see if he's even done it this year. But to your point, so he was drafted 17th overall. The Lakers the year before had made a surprise conference finals run, right? They had gotten there. They lost to the Nuggets. They got swept by the Nuggets or whatever it was, but they got their butts kicked by the Nuggets. So you're viewed as a contending team. Yeah, he played 12 minutes one game this year. He's played 13 total minutes this season. They drafted a one-and-done point guard.
Yeah.
There was no chance that was going to be successful.
Yeah.
It's why everyone hammered them for not taking Jaime Jaquez, who had played 3 years at UCLA or however long he'd been there, knew the Los Angeles area, was a plug-and-play, ready-to-play guy, not a long-term 6'6" point guard project who you've got to teach how to play basketball.
Yeah.
So it was a stupid pick. He might not be a bad player, but it was a really bad fit. And maybe he is bad. Maybe he just can't play. We will get to know what Jaylen Hood-Schifino is all about. I suspect the Jazz will give him some time.
Yes.
I think they will really try and, maybe not right away, but they will try and see what this asset is. So an interesting player. And while I was watching Orlando play, this was before the trade, I was kind of thinking, I bet you the Jazz could get Anthony Black, who was the number 8 overall pick, and again was another name that had been talked about with the Jazz in the same draft.
Yep.
And I kind of remember thinking, watching this game, he looks awful in Orlando. They really need scoring. They need Colin Sexton. It's what Orlando needs. It's I wonder if you could build a deal around Colin for Anthony Black. And it's okay, it's a point guard who has not worked out, has really struggled to shoot the ball, but is intriguing, and the Jazz may want a more pure point guard than Keontae George and may want someone bigger than Isaiah Collier. It's okay, you got a lesser version of that, or at least a lower drafted version. Maybe he's not lesser at all, but you got another version of that from the exact same draft, the exact same age player in Jaylen Hood-Schifino, and you didn't give up Colin Sexton.
Yeah.
I was honestly thinking, maybe you give up Colin to get Anthony Black. And there was 9 draft pick spots between them. That's a very good gamble for the Jazz. Is basically what, the long story short, like, if you just want to test out some pieces and take a low-cost flyer, the low cost was $55,000 to each player, and you got draft picks with it. Yep. And maybe you just wanted the draft picks in the first place. So anyways, that's a long conversation, kind of how I view Jaylen Hood-Schifino, because, again, I'm a little surprised we don't have a lot of questions about him, and I think he's worth addressing. He's worth talking about. Now
we can start off on the mailbag questions. First up, a DM from Aggie fan Dan. Why isn't Dallas interested in all of the Jazz's picks for Luka? From what it sounded like, I've watched a lot of videos, a lot of takes on this trade. The Mavericks wanted an all-NBA player.
They want to win.
Yeah, they want to win.
Anthony Davis is awesome.
Yeah.
Like, that's what's getting lost in this conversation. Anthony Davis is, in my opinion, the best defensive player in the world. Like, even with Wemby, like, Anthony Davis has done all the things Wemby does. And I love Wemby's shot blocking. I love, like, he will get there. He will surpass Anthony Davis. AD, like, switches, gets back, gets the rebound, challenges a shot. Like, Anthony Davis does everything. He is so good defensively. It's awesome. And then he's a great offensive player, too.
Yep.
Like, he's averaging 25 points a game this year. He might be the best defensive player in the NBA, and he averages 25 points. It's like, he's a top 10 player. He's been out of the lineup enough 2 and 3 and 4 years ago that we've kind of lost him. He played 76 games last year. He's played 90% of their games this year. If he's healthy, AD rules.
Yes. The game before he got traded, he had a 40-20 game.
Yeah.
So
like, he can win.
Yes.
He's been already, in my opinion, the best player on a championship team. Like, he was better than LeBron in the bubble.
Yeah.
LeBron's awesome and was better than he is now, but, like, he's already been there. He's been to the mountaintop as, if not the best player, like 1A, 1 and 1A or 1B, whatever you want to call it. Like, he's been there. So I don't hate that. But yes, to answer the question, they want to win.
Yeah.
And the Jazz, because of when Lauri Markkanen signed on August 7th or whatever it was, instead of August 6th, Lauri Markkanen is eligible to be traded on Friday. The trade deadline is on Thursday. That was on purpose.
Yeah.
Lauri doesn't want to get traded. He wants to be here. He's got family. He wants to let his kids go to school. So he did that specifically so he couldn't be in this trade. And the Jazz, that hurt the Jazz. We talked about it. And unfortunately, like, this came to fruition where they got involved in a Luka trade and didn't have the player to offer that may have had some interest. And even then, the Mavericks would have preferred to have AD over Lauri. So
now we can get into the extra replies. First up from Josh Chisholm, do you think the Jazz make any more moves? Sounds like they want to, but it's a weird market.
Yeah. Jazz are going to make more moves. I would be stunned if they don't.
Yes.
Jazz are going to be active.
Who do you think, I'm going to build off of this question, who do you think is most likely to get traded? And then who do you think, like, from your opinion, the Jazz should trade, take advantage of their value?
I guess I will go default. Svi Mykhailiuk remains the most likely to get traded. The same reason last week I said Drew Eubanks was the most likely, and that did come to fruition.
Yes.
So I will still say Svi. I don't think you have to trade either Colin or Colin Sexton, I should say, or John Collins. You don't have to trade them. I'm sure they would move Jordan Clarkson if they can.
Yeah.
Maybe not, but I would think that they probably have explored that. And there are teams that could use an offensive scorer. Again, Jordan's, look at his numbers. He's shooting 35% from 3 this year. He takes like 6 a game. So teams that need shooting, which is everybody in the league, could use a Jordan Clarkson. So I could see with his timeline where he is and that he wants to win. I suspect there would probably be mutual interest, though Jordan's not going to ever say that. He's just like the best guy, so I don't think he would do that. But I'm sure the Jazz have talked to him and be like, hey, do you want to be here? Do you want to be somewhere else? And I'm sure Jordan would welcome winning if that's what it required. So if a trade was what was required to do it. So I don't think you have to trade anybody, in all honesty. I would think most likely I would go Svi, John Collins, Colin Sexton would be my top 3, like in order of most likely.
I was going to say, at the beginning of the year, for John Collins, we said we don't know how you trade him.
Yeah,
like with
negative asset.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to put this into another terms. Zach LaVine just got traded to Sacramento. At the beginning of the year, people were like, you might have to attach a pick with Zach LaVine to have a team take him on, but they just got a first-round pick for him.
Yeah.
Their own pick.
It was their own pick, but they got it back.
Yeah. So I feel like the Jazz could I'm not saying you're going to get an unprotected pick for John Collins, but I don't think he's a negative asset anymore with how he's been playing.
No, and to this point, like there's a lot of Colin Sextons around the world. There are, and that hurts the value. You know what I mean?
Yep.
The supply is high. The demand's okay, but the supply is really high, which is why I didn't love the Spurs trade, and we can address that coming up here in a minute. But there's actually not a lot of John Collinses. It's why John probably has the most value. He's 6'9". He's playing unbelievably well. He was still really good in this Orlando game. He's his bounce is totally back.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't there last year. Like that first lob he caught was like, woof, his eyeballs are at the rim.
Yeah.
Still, he can still do that. He's only 28 or whatever it is, so he's still young. And yeah, he shoots awesome, and he's playing great, and he's a good rebounder. Like he's a good guy. That's low supply.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of those guys around. So yeah, he's turned himself into a very good asset. So good for John. And I think the Jazz recognize that sell high. You should always sell high, and John's playing as high as ever.
Next up from Spence Johnson, how many more second-round picks do you think the Jazz will get from this trade deadline?
You're probably being facetious. I picked up on that. I don't know, 2. Like, here's the thing. When in 2022, 2021, 2020, let's say right in that area where the Jazz were like in their window and felt like it was open with Rudy and Donovan, they lacked little assets to make moves. Like, do you remember, what was his name, Matt Johnson? I can't remember the guy's name now. The shooter that they got from Toronto, who was just awful. He's just awful. I think he's still in the league. Good for him. It's because they lacked little pieces to move around. Like, the Clippers said, hey, guys, we want to cut salary. Here's the thing. The Jazz had to attach a first-round pick to get off of Derek Favors, and it has haunted them. It has really hurt them. It's why I like the Bulls pick. They got their pick back. They don't have to do everything now to just stay under the top 10, so they hold onto their draft pick or top 8 so it doesn't go to San Antonio. Like, that Favors trade has really hurt the Jazz. This is a terrible trade.
Yeah.
They should have just ate his money and let him go away. But they didn't have other good, valuable assets or financial flexibility. So the Clippers had this $11.5 million deal from P.J. Tucker and a second-round pick. And they got a player who was going to be in their rotation. They shaved $7 million off their salary, and all they did was give up a second-round pick. So the Jazz in 2030, when this pick realizes itself, and they are in a tough financial situation, and they have a player who can't play, whether he's injured or whatever, and they want to shave money and get somebody who can come in and give them 10 minutes a night, you can trade this 2030 pick for the Drew Eubanks of 2030. And I know that doesn't seem valuable. It's extraordinarily valuable. Yeah. This was a good trade for the Clippers. This is like a really good trade for the Clippers. And the Jazz just said, great. We're just going to eat this money. We got to pay this money anyways because you have to be you're going to pay these salaries. Half the money that comes in goes to the players anyway. So you're paying the money. Might as well get an asset and then use it that way down the line. Yeah. So second round picks are goofy. They're silly. They have value. And the Clippers showed you the value of it.
I'm going to attach 2 replies here, both about the Luka trade.
Okay.
Jazz Time Jones says, this Luka trade feels like the Pau trade. Hard for the NBA to not feel rigged. It is just entertainment. And then Remy says, let's assume Nico is not an idiot. What's he possibly seeing that everyone else isn't? What could he know that would justify the trade?
A couple of things here. A, the NBA is totally different than the Pau trade. Now, first of all, the NBA did... The only reason the Pau trade went through, you got to remember, is because everyone thought the NBA was rigged. And David Stern blocked the Chris Paul trade to the Lakers. So he nixed that, and they said, okay, we'll turn our attention, and they got Pau instead. If I remember correctly, but I'm almost positive that's exactly what happened. So it wasn't even rigged then. But now the difference is, like, they already had Kobe.
Yes.
LeBron, with all due respect to LeBron, is no longer prime Kobe when they just acquired Pau and went on to win those titles. And then, you know what, credit the Lakers, they hit on Andrew Bynum. Like, they hit a grand slam with Andrew Bynum where for 2 or 3 years he was a top 10 center in the NBA, and they didn't have to pay him because he was on a rookie contract. Like, that was awesome. That was really good work. Congratulations. You did your job well. So that was credit to the Lakers, and I get that hurt. I get that felt difficult. The Lakers are really strapped when it comes to assets. And free agency doesn't really exist anymore in the NBA. And maybe the Lakers find a workaround because people want to sign in LA, but, like, who was the last great player to sign in LA? Like, who was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bypass signing a $200 million extension so I can go to free agency and sign with the Lakers. Yeah. Like, Paul George didn't do that, and the Lakers didn't have the ability to sign him. And by the way, the Paul George signing has been awful. Yes. Like, the Philadelphia 76ers are already trying to trade him, apparently, for Jimmy Butler. Like, they can't wait to get off of him because it was so bad. So the Lakers have Luka. Luka's awesome. It's going to keep the Lakers relevant for a long time. They may not have the assets to build a good team around him, in all honesty. So they may never get over the hump with him because they have spent all their assets trying to keep LeBron happy. And while this gives them, a pathway to be successful post-LeBron, which was their big question, it doesn't necessarily mean that they've got all the pieces worked out. Yes. They do have still their 2031 pick they can trade.
And Austin Reeves.
Who
I imagine that since you're bringing in Luka, he's probably on his way out. But
I would think so.
That remains to be seen.
And again, to our point, like Colin Sexton, Austin Reeves, these guys are available. Like high-scoring guards who can do a little bit of ball handling are plentiful.
Yes.
So I actually don't think they're going to get like a huge difference maker for Austin Reeves. Like, you're not getting the guy that pushes you over the top.
Regarding what he's seeing that other people isn't, assuming that the Mavs GM did not make a generational mistake here, it has there is nothing to know that whether this is true or not, but it has to be something behind closed doors with Luka. Maybe he's hard to work with. Maybe he refuses to listen to some things that the coaching staff suggests of him, which is something that they have already kind of said, which is that his lack of conditioning has led to his injuries.
And it's only going to get worse?
Yeah. There's no way to really know.
I think that's maybe Nico Harrison's an idiot. It's possible. There are bad GMs out there. There really are. I suspect, they were sick of dealing with him. Luka is temperamental. I think they were tired of his lackadaisical approach to his body and what it takes to win at the highest level in the NBA. The Michael Finley taking the beer away from him after the conference finals was like a thing. It was weird, but it's like someone actually went and pulled a beer out of his hand and was like, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And they let everyone else celebrate. They didn't let Luka celebrate, which is a little strange. And then they were about to have to give him whatever, $350 million and be financially tied to him, which 29 teams in the NBA were willing to do it. But the team that has had him closest was unwilling to do it. And that probably is a little bit telling. So I suspect there is more to the story behind the scenes, but we don't exactly know why.
Yeah.
Can I get to our Blue Sky questions real quick?
Yeah.
I meant to do that. I apologize. And this one's in line with the trade question, so we'll go to Sammy Paradise. It says, why were the Jazz involved in the Luca Doncic trade? Why was there cash? Why were the cash considerations necessary? So in a two-team trade, we saw this with Jeremy Grant and the Pistons and the Trailblazers. You can just trade a guy into cap space. You can just take a guy into cap space. In multi-team trades, I'm sorry if I'm wrong on this, but I think this is the key. The three teams all have to quote unquote touch each other, meaning every team has to send something to one spot or the other.
Okay.
So you can't have the Lakers trade something to Dallas trade something to the Jazz, but the Jazz don't give anything to the Lakers.
Okay.
They all have to have a connecting piece for it to be a multi-team trade. So quite literally, the Jazz just had to give $55,000 to each team, which is nothing in the NBA. Great, send me $55,000, we'd all take it. But no, it's nothing. It's pretend money, but you have to do something, which is why sometimes you'll see the right to swap a second round pick 10 years down the line that's top 45 protected or top 50 protected. It's so valueless, but by definition, you have to touch the other team. So somebody has to get something. So that's a pretty simple explanation, I think, of why that's the case. Alex, also on Blue Sky, says, what the heck was Dallas thinking? And from a Jazz perspective, why would Ainge help facilitate a trade that makes the LA pick worse? This is, of course, the 2027 Los Angeles Lakers pick that is top 4 protected that the Jazz got in the Mike Conley trade. We explained what Dallas was thinking, why I think what Dallas was thinking. As far as the 2027 pick goes, it does hurt it, and there's no question about it. But if the Jazz didn't take a second-year first-round draft pick and 2 second-round picks for free, somebody else would have.
Yeah.
So the Jazz just said, well, if there's cash on the table, you're right, it's going to hurt us, 2017, or the 2027 draft pick. This hurts, but the Jazz weren't the roadblock of this trade happening. The trade would have happened. Somebody would have taken Jaylen Hood-Schifino, whether it was the Jazz or somebody else. And the Jazz just said, well, if you're giving away these assets, we might as well get them.
Yeah.
But the 2027 pick was going to lose value because Luka was going to get traded to the Lakers one way or another, and they just thought, fine, get ours while we can. So pretty simple.
Next, back to the extra plies from the Sitting Dan. Is there any chance the league blocks the Luka trade to allow other teams to beat the Lakers' offer? No.
Deal's already done.
Yeah. Luka's already landed in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
From James McKinney, is San Antonio creating another dynasty in this current moment? We can talk about the trade relating to that. The Spurs just brought in De'Aaron Fox, and they basically gave away 3 first-round picks, 3 second-round picks, and none of their young players. Something interesting, though, is they gave away a 2025 Charlotte first-round pick, but that is, I think, lottery or top 10 protected.
It's top 14 protected,
yes, so, and it's going to turn into 2 second-round picks.
Yeah.
So basically not even a first-round pick there. And then they gave up their own 27 first-round pick.
Yeah.
I imagine with De'Aaron Fox re-signing and Wembanyama on your team, that's not going to be a very good pick.
You would think probably late 20s.
And then I would say the most valuable asset is a 2031 Timberwolves pick?
The Timberwolves pick that they traded in this year's draft for the number 8 overall pick.
Yes.
So that's a valuable asset.
Yeah.
I put out a tweet last night that a lot of people hated, that I thought the Spurs had the worst trade deadline so far.
Okay.
As we mentioned, like, there are a lot of De'Aaron Foxes on the planet. He's good. He's made an all-star team. He's made an all-NBA team that he got rewarded for because the Kings finally made a playoff appearance.
Yes.
Now, he's been with the Kings for 7 years. They have 3 total playoff wins, with De'Aaron Fox as arguably their best player. He's fun. He's fast. He gets a lot of steals. He was the most clutch player in the NBA a few years ago. He's got some cool things. He's 6 years older right now than Victor Wembanyama. He, too, is about to sign his 3rd contract this summer, which gets you beyond the rookie max, gets you into the really expensive max. And by the way, after he just got traded to this team and they gave up a lot on it, he understands that they are invested in him, so they are going to have to pay him a lot of money.
Yes.
It may not be the full max, but it's going to be really close. It's going to be over $45 million a year, or whatever it is. It's going to be up, certainly over 40. So the Spurs traded for a 28-year-old guard who doesn't shoot well, next to the guy in Victor Wembanyama who, like, the only thing you need to have is shooters.
Yeah.
And they gave up assets to do it, including, that Wolves pick, as we just learned. What does an unprotected 2030 pick go for? Well, the Jazz just got 3 firsts or Jazz just gave up 3 firsts to get one. So you can say, they only gave up 1 first. It's like, unless the Kings want to flip that into 3 firsts, which the Jazz just did.
Yeah.
Or the Suns just did. And Oklahoma City maybe says, yeah, great, we'll do that. We'll short the Timberwolves in 2030 and give you some 3 draft picks. So Kings got Zach LaVine, who's as good as De'Aaron Fox. I know we hate Zach LaVine. I know he doesn't play a whole lot. This year, they are the exact same player.
Yeah.
I mean, Zach is a little less of a point guard, a little more of just like a scoring 2 guard, but they're the same quality of player. So I liked it for the Kings. I didn't understand the Spurs' rush to go out and trade assets to get a player, because everybody wants to play with Victor Wembanyama. AJ DeBonsa, going to BYU, was in France last week and said, I want to play with Victor Wembanyama. Like, that's the guy everyone's going to want to play with, because he makes your life easy, because he's better than you are, he's bigger than you are, he plays great defense, so he just cleans up all your mistakes. I don't understand why they went after De'Aaron Fox. Like, okay, let's do a quick exercise, and not to get too hung up on a team that doesn't have anything to do with the Jazz, but I'm going to do it anyways.
Yeah.
All right. Does Oklahoma City have a better guard than De'Aaron Fox?
Yes.
Does Memphis have a guard that's better than De'Aaron Fox?
Yes.
Do the Lakers have a guard now that's better than De'Aaron Fox?
Yes.
Do the Clippers have a guard that's better than De'Aaron Fox?
That's where
James Harden?
That's where it gets tricky.
But James Harden this year's been better than De'Aaron Fox. Do the Minnesota Timberwolves have a guard that's better than De'Aaron Fox?
Yes.
Do the Phoenix Suns have a guard that's better than De'Aaron Fox? Okay. Do the Dallas Mavericks have a guard that's better than De'Aaron Fox? Kyrie's better than De'Aaron.
Probably, yeah.
Okay, I just did 8 of the 9 teams in front of them in the standings, and they don't have the better guard in any of those matchups.
Yeah.
Like, what was the rush?
And that is the biggest thing, is he wanted to come to your team in a year and a half anyways.
Yeah, right.
It's sort of like the Knicks trading for Melo when he said he was going there in 6 months anyways.
Yeah, it's and I get it. Like, ball in the hand, it matters. Let's do the team behind the Sacramento Kings. And now it's not even Sacramento, it's San Antonio.
Yes.
Do the Golden State Warriors have a guard that's better? You're like, okay, like, I like De'Aaron Fox. He's the 14th best guard in the NBA. Like, whatever, fine. 14th best, 15th best. Again, I've said this, like, if I were going to trade for De'Aaron and give up an unprotected future first from another team, my own first, and give the Bulls back their pick, which very easily could have been realized, it's top 8 protected each of the next 2 years. Like, as we've learned, it's hard to guarantee yourself that you're going to be that bad. Like, I might have just held on to it and called the Jazz and said, like, what do you want for Colin Sexton?
Yeah.
Like, and we'll let Colin take, because De'Aaron Fox is not taking 20 shots a game now in San Antonio. He's not. He was in Sacramento because they didn't have a whole lot else. He's down to 14 or 15 shots. Okay, now he's in Colin Sexton range. And could you have gotten Colin Sexton for a first? And he only makes $18 million and you don't have to pay him for 2 years? and he's probably not asking for 40 after that. Like, so I did not like it for San Antonio.
Yeah.
And then the archetype, like as the non-shooting guard, I don't think actually works that well.
And I agree, because a lot of their young players, like it's not like they have Keegan Murray and Dalton Connect. Like they don't have young promising shooters. They have Stephon Castle,
Who doesn't shoot at all.
doesn't shoot. Jeremy Sohan
Doesn't shoot at all.
doesn't shoot at all. And then Devin Vassell, he can shoot. He can shoot, but like he's not like a catch and shoot guy.
No,
and I feel like that's a lot of what you need next to De'Aaron Fox.
The Celtics probably laid out the blueprint last year. Like you just need shooters everywhere, and the Thunder are doing the same thing. Like you just got to have shooters everywhere, and the Spurs are bucking that trend. And giving up assets to do it. So yeah, I just thought it was weird. I could be totally off. Maybe the Kings have hidden how good De'Aaron Fox is because the Kings are awful. But anyways, I didn't love that. So no to the mailbag question. I don't think they're making a dynasty. They are because they have Wemby.
Yes.
They are not now closer because they have De'Aaron Fox.
Next up from Cam Young, is TJ McConnell a good comp for Isaiah Collier?
No. TJ McConnell's like the best defensive guard in the NBA. Like, Alex Caruso and Lou Dort and some of those guys, Derek White. And TJ McConnell's like in that conversation of like the next best guards.
Yeah.
No. Comps for Isaiah are interesting.
I would say like a rookie Russell Westbrook, but he's not that promising.
Yeah, he's not that bouncy.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't want Will Hardy to yell at me when I'm like, does he remind you of Tony Parker? Because it's like, yeah, it's a little guard who's the fastest guy in the league and can't shoot threes.
Yeah.
You know who he might be? And this is like lofty, because this guy's going to be a Hall of Famer. So he's not this person.
Yeah.
But like early career Kyle Lowry is who I think he is.
Okay.
I think that's like exactly who he is.
Yeah.
Like, and you remember like nobody wanted Kyle Lowry because he was a jerk.
Yes.
Like, get rid of him. He's not very nice. Now, Isaiah's actually great. I quite enjoy Isaiah the person. He's like a natural leader. He's got some of those natural qualities that I think Kyle Lowry had. Lowry's made 6 All-Star games, was the third best player on a championship team. But Kyle Lowry's first year in the NBA. Now, he only played 10 games, so let's just go his first 2 years. He averaged, let me see if I can get this to add up. I'll just go his second season. 9.6 points. He averaged 3.6 assists, so he's not as good a passer as Isaiah was. He shot 25% from the three-point line and 43% from the floor. And then his third year, 25% from three. The third year, 24% from three. It wasn't until he got to late career Houston and then Toronto that he figured out how to shoot. And he wasn't ever 40%. He was like 35%, 36%, 37%. But he's got almost the identical build. And if you heard the jokes about Kyle Lowry's build?
Yes.
Like they have this exact same build. Like, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can Google the Kyle Lowry jokes. But like they have the exact same build. And like super steady point guard.
Yeah. I like it.
Probably a pretty big recruit. I can't even remember what Kyle Lowry was as a recruit. I have no idea. It says 29 here. I mean, Isaiah was number 1.
Yeah.
But 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, stocky, quick, leadership qualities, going to have to learn how to shoot. Good defensive player. Like I think Isaiah's going to be a good defensive player. He's tough. And maybe the NBA has just moved past 6 foot tall guards, and that's the issue that Kyle Lowry, the league had just not gotten there yet. But there's some Kyle Lowry there. That would be my comp for him right now. Like early career Kyle Lowry. Like if you're saying what's his best case scenario, like Kyle Lowry I'd say is up there.
Yeah. Next, we already addressed this, but I just want to give them a shout out because they basically asked everything we did address. From Quinn, if he isn't using a trade in the next couple of days, do you see the Jazz keeping JHS and giving him a shot here? Do you know how the Jazz felt about him in the draft?
I don't actually know how they felt about him in the draft, other than I had been told there was like strong interest.
Yes.
The Jazz had really done their work to figure out who he is. So yes, I suspect, unless there's some weird trade that comes up that someone's like got to have him, I think he's going to play. Like Kyra Lewis played last year. Now the Jazz were trying to lose games at that point, but you just moved Keontae George to the bench for Isaiah Collier. Like, let JHS have a chance. Put he and Keontae coming off the bench as your point guards. Why not?
Why not?
Yeah,
exactly.
Have Colin start and play with Isaiah, and then have Keontae and JHS play a lot and see who becomes the guy there. See if he's worth bringing back. Like I think there's a not zero chance the Jazz just assume they're bringing him back next year.
Yeah.
He's a young asset. And he knows our program. Unless he's just horrible, you give him a chance to come back next season. Like I would bet he's with the summer league team, unless somebody else wants to give him a guaranteed contract, which good for them.
Last question from Clayson Searle. Do you think Sacramento is still interested in either John Collins or Colin Sexton?
So my understanding is the John Collins, Kevin Huerter Trey Lyles thing was like pretty real.
Mm-hmm.
And now Kevin Huerter plays for the Bulls.
Yeah.
Well, at least conceivably plays for the Bulls. That deal has not been completed. So there's still work. There's still room for these things to get done. But I think those conversations were real. I don't know how close it got to being done, but I do think the Kings were really interested and were maybe even willing to give up a first-round pick. Again, not to throw Collins' name into every trade, but it's like if you just lost De'Aaron Fox, like could you use the trade you just got from the Spurs, any of them, to get Collin?
Yeah.
And like you still give up Trey Lyles and one other piece, or there's ways you can make deals expand and work and throw in $10 million or $8 million here. The Jazz would, I would think, do it for like Keegan Murray and Trey Lyles.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't even need a draft pick there. And maybe they're like, well, we got our shooter. We got Zach LaVine who can really shoot. We need a point guard now, and Collin brings that extra shooting. Like that would probably be somewhat intriguing for the Jazz, right? This is a fourth-year player who's got good size. So I don't know. I mean, this is pure speculation on my part, but I would think there is still opportunity. And I think the Kings made like a win-now move. I thought the Kings could have hit the reset button and been like, no, if we lose De'Aaron, we're going to take young players and start this process over. Zach LaVine's 29. You've got Domantas Sabonis, who's in his prime or entering his prime soon. They should probably want to buy now, and they need more shooting. So go get a John Collins or a Colin Sexton.
I agree with you that it's intriguing from the Jazz's perspective, but just with how the West looks, I really don't feel, even if Zach LaVine is the same player as De'Aaron Fox, or he fits them better, or he's a better player, I just don't. They are not any more of a threat in the West, in my opinion. And a 1 through 3 of Colin Sexton, Zach LaVine, and DeMar DeRozan, that's just like, that sounds like a whole lot of no defense.
Agreed. Agreed. And Colin's like, he tries.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like his effort's there, which is nice about Colin. He's not like an elite defensive player.
Yeah.
He's no TJ McConnell. But
yes.
he can play.
And Zach LaVine is athletic, but DeMar DeRozan is like a cone, especially in these later years.
Yeah,
of
he's
his
not.
career
He's
on
not.
defense.
And Sabonis sucks too.
Yeah.
They need some defenders.
Yeah.
That's what I would do if I were them as well. I would go in that direction. In fact, I would see if TJ McConnell's available. It's a great idea. Quickly, Alex on Blue Sky, he has the second question.
Oh.
He said, have the recent trades changed anything for the Jazz? Example, now that Fox is off the board, is Sexton more appealing for teams? Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, and same with Zach LaVine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, some teams wanted to add scoring and wanted to add a punch, and they lost it, and now they think who else is available. So, yeah, it just naturally, again, supply and demand, two of the pieces of the supply are gone.
Yeah.
So everyone moves up a spot.
All right, is that it?
I think that's it. If the Jazz do anything crazy in the next couple of days, let's leave the door open for an emergency pod, like Friday.
Yes.
Or even Thursday. The trade deadline's Thursday at 1:00. Maybe we even just plan on it.
Okay.
Just recording a podcast on Thursday.
Yeah,
Should we do that?
Yeah, let's do it. On Thursday, we could do a quick hit, come in, talk about what the Jazz do. Maybe if there's another crazy NBA league-wide trade, we can talk about that as well. But we can plan on an emergency pod.
Oh, we are pre-planning an emergency podcast, which by default is no longer an emergency.
Yes.
We're going to do a second Jazz Notes podcast this week on Thursday if you're available.
Yes.
I'm available too. So let's plan on that. So look for that. Appreciate everyone who tuned in today. Great questions as always. And we'll be back with you now in 3 days. Find us on Twitter at Ben's Hoops, C Holt Sports. We'll talk to you soon.